Please welcome the chairman of WWE, Vince McMahon!
Throughout this past year, our WWE superstars performed tirelessly for all of you. Week after week, month after month, but we all knew there was something missing. Something very important. The most important. That would be all of you, our fans, the WWE Universe. And as we emerge from this dreadful pandemic, on behalf of our entire WWE family, we would simply like to say thank you and welcome you to WrestleMania!
Hello everyone and welcome to an all-new episode of Palace Off the Top Rope. Thank you so much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. And WrestleMania was back in business this past weekend from Tampa, Florida at Raymond James Stadium. And as you just heard right there, Vince McMahon, the CEO and owner of World Wrestling Entertainment, opening up the show with the entire wrestling roster on stage, welcoming back the WWE fans for the first time since the start of this pandemic into a live show to participate, to cheer, boo, whatever you want to do as a paying customer. It was a nice sight to see. WrestleMania, unless you've been there live, folks, you don't know what it's like, the atmosphere. It really is something magical. I just went a few years ago in 2018 in New Orleans, and I got to tell you, there's nothing. I've been to wrestling shows live, and they're all spectacular in one form or another. But going to WrestleMania, there's something about the aura of it that just takes it to a whole other level. I've never been to a Super Bowl, and I imagine that's the same kind of atmosphere. But WrestleMania is just there's just this super grandeur to it. And again, I can't explain it. You have to be there. You have to experience it live. So I can only imagine what it was like in that moment. For the fans in attendance to see McMahon there with the entire roster and most of the roster there. You can see the smiles on their faces, and we're talking, good guys, bad guys, all out there, but they were all smiling because they know, along with wrestling diehards, that the fans are one of the most important, if not the most important, component of making a wrestling show spectacular. Is that reaction from the live crowd, the feedback, all that stuff really matters. And it's been a rough watch these last couple of years with wrestling, just in terms of storylines and bookings and all that stuff. But I can only imagine what it was like for the wrestlers this past year, having to wrestle with no crowd. I mean, you go back to last year's WrestleMania, which I just barely rewatched, probably for the first time since it aired live last year. And it was just so weird to see all these wrestlers doing the matches and working hard and working their asses off and, beating the hell out of each other with no reaction whatsoever. They were working in an empty building, and it was just the commentators and the wrestlers, so you could hear everything. The live commentary, the wrestlers could hear that, and they can hear themselves slapping each other around and talking trash and all of that. But I can only imagine what it was like to perform like that without no audience. And I know the WWE tried to adapt and do as much as possible to try to make it sustainable for the wrestlers. They created this thing called the Thunderdome, right, where they performed at the Tropicana Field, which is home, I believe, of the Tampa Bay Rays. And they built this virtual dome of fans where they would have them, as on the screen, if they were computing through Zoom. That's the way wrestlers saw the fans for this past year. So I can only imagine how elated they were that they were going to get to perform in front of a live audience and get real emotions and have them react as their characters, because all of that, you need all of that to make your wrestling character and your shows and your matches all work. Like, it's all like a teamwork effort. Like, you can get away in sports with football and doing like no crowds, because at the end of the day, you're like, it's a sport trying to, you're trying to win points, and it's all about the objective. But for wrestling, it's theatrics, it's all of it. It's athleticism, it's drama, but you need that component of the audience to make it all whole. So I can understand the dwindling ratings on both sides for like WWE and AEW, why they've been so down. And a large part of it is because watching a wrestling show these days is pretty weird with no crowd reaction, or if anything, it's piped in, or you have wrestlers there in the crowd posing as an audience, so it's not really the same thing because you're not really getting what the audience is feeding off of the stuff you're giving them. So it was a nice sight to see, and it was great to see WrestleMania look like WrestleMania this year with a big, huge crowd, which I believe this was like the second event like in, I don't want to say the world, or possibly the world. So we had the Super Bowl this past February, and they had allowed, I think, around 25 to 30,000 people in attendance. So that was our first major test of, like, could we get a big enough crowd for an event like this? So WWE paid attention and watched how they did the Super Bowl and how they did their fans and all that stuff. So they kind of modeled the same way. You had your cardboard cutouts set up throughout the stadium where you would social distance people. But yet, for the wrestling show, why it was different was because you saw a huge chunk of the audience on the floor and all together, like if it were just a regular show. Of course, you had your people wearing masks and stuff like that. So that was the only part where you could notice it, like that this is a different year. But it was great to see a live audience again. And again, watching it felt like it's weird to say nostalgic, the good old days, but that's just where we are currently as a nation and all that stuff. We're already nostalgic for our old life and the way things were. So just a little bit of hope was brought back with that, which we'll eventually, I think, get back to the way things were. I know things have been changed forever, but seeing that just as a picture on a television screen, and of course I can only imagine being there live, it was special. So for that reason alone, this WrestleMania will forever be remembered, specifically because it was the first one back with a huge live audience. But overall, as a show, it was fine. It was entertaining. It was good enough. And maybe that was because I had my expectations lowered a lot, given the way a lot of the show was booked. And you can notice that from myself, having listened, if you go back and listen to my show with Brandon that we did last week, where we ran down the entire card, where we were just iffy on a lot of stuff. And so we were just going to have to wait and see how it played out. And there was some really good standout moments from this show, which I'll count down later on in the next segment. I'll give you my top 5 matches of WrestleMania week, which is now basically what it's become, right? WrestleMania is no longer just like a one-day event. It is now spread out throughout the course of the week, and that includes NXT, which put on their own 2-night show event, which was pretty fantastic. And WrestleMania, of course, emanated Saturday and Sunday. And I think that's just the new normal going forward. I mean, we have to find ways for this thing to adapt and to grow and to get it bigger and bigger. And what better way than to have WrestleMania split up the entire weekend, and it dominates the entire conversation on social media. It's good for the city to bring in revenue. You can double dip as far as like selling tickets for both nights. And as far as I know, both nights did tremendous as far as like fan attendance. I think you're looking at around 25,000 for each night, so over 50,000 in total, which is awesome. Now, can you imagine when we're back at 100% capacity and, we can just fill up these entire arenas? And I know next year they're going to be at AT&T Stadium in Dallas, Texas, which you can fill at least 100,000 people in there. Now, will it get there? Who knows? But the fact that you can spread that out over a whole weekend is awesome, especially for me as a diehard wrestling fan. Why wouldn't you want it all weekend as opposed to just one night? So there have been those that I've seen online that are like, get it back to one day. I'm like, no, you got to adapt with the times. You got to milk this as much as possible. And it's not like you're doing it all the time. It's one time out of every year. So why not just go as big as possible, spread it out, get as much revenue as you can out of the city. You generate it for the city, actually. And WWE just, they just become a bigger brand because of it. So good job on them for that. I know last year this is the second time they're doing the 2-night event. But last year it was an anomaly just because we were all basically quarantined at the time. So we were like, yeah, give us a Saturday and a Sunday full of content. We need stuff to watch. But now having seen it, with an actual crowd in the audience, would people be going to both nights? And it played off tremendously. And as a viewer, it doesn't overwhelm you or burn you out, because these last couple of WrestleManias, it's kind of become like the Super Bowl, where it's almost like an all-day event, and the coverage and all that stuff can wear you out. So by the time you get to the end of the event, you're kind of burned out. But the fact that they've split it up, and there was about 14 matches total, but you split that up 7 and 7, and it makes for a more watchable show, and the matches don't get worn out or timed out. You don't have the audience fatigue live there in person. So for the most part, everybody was mostly into all of the matches that were going on. And as a viewer at home, you spend 3.5 to 4 hours instead of a full on 8 for just one sitting experience. So you can split that up, and it's a win-win for everybody. So good job to WWE on that. I know they took a lot of inspiration from New Japan. Don't get it twisted, WWE is not the first ones to do a 2-night big wrestling event. New Japan actually did this. They tried this out, I believe, a couple of years ago with Wrestle Kingdom, which is their version of WrestleMania, and they split it up to a 2-night event, and it worked out well for them. But of course, WWE is the bigger name brand. They're going to get more recognition for it, so they'll probably be credited with doing a big two-night wrestling event, and that's just the way things go. You have your Dave Meltzers that'll counter that always, but for the most part, WWE will be known probably going forward for having WrestleMania being a whole weekend event, 2 nights, and that's just awesome for wrestling fans. So I couldn't be more excited and more thrilled with how things went this past weekend, considering I wasn't super excited about the card going in. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to break down all the things that I liked from WrestleMania, including my top 5 matches of the weekend, and I'll include NXT TakeOver in on that. I'm going to include them because they were a huge part of that week. And I'll tell you about some stuff that I didn't like, that didn't play off well in the show. So this is Palace Off the Top Rope. We'll be right back.
They say everything's bigger here, and not to mess with us. Because this place runs deep in our hearts. Here's the bottom line. This is where the jaws will drop, the feet will stomp, the crowds will roar, and the superstars will soar. Where the roofs are blown off, asses get handed, and moments are made in the only way we know how. What? WrestleMania calls, and Dallas says, oh, hell yeah! It's gonna be madness. It's gonna be madness. It's gonna be madness.
All right, welcome back to the show, and WrestleMania 38 will be coming to you from the AT&T Stadium in Dallas, Texas, next April. I'm so looking forward to that. I missed it the last time it was here, and actually it's okay because it ended up being such a so-and-so WrestleMania, but I'm not going to miss it this time around, and I've got somebody that lives up there in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so you better believe we're going to plot to go to that event. We were actually plotting to go to this year's WrestleMania, but there were so many what-if factors, and plus the ticket sales went on sale super late, so we didn't know prices and all that stuff. And usually WrestleMania, it used to be like that back in the day. They would release ticket sales super late in the game. But now everybody likes to get everything so ahead of schedule. And usually around September, October, around there, you get the WrestleMania travel packages on sale where you get hotels booked, and whether you buy packages for NXT, the Hall of Fame, WrestleMania, and the Monday Night Raw afterwards. So there's all those packages that come out super early. And then I think around like November is when like the individual tickets go on sale. So they like to have this stuff planned out ahead of time. This year it was a little like unexpected. Yes, we had crowds back live in person, but there was still like the what if unknown factor about it. Now I think as the vaccine's coming out and, we're getting more comfortable and in some way trying to go back to our old way of life, I think the whole like release schedule of tickets and all that stuff will be on par with the way it's been like in recent years, where we'll get it early. So we'll plan it out fully. We'll know how much we're going to have to pay and how much we're going to have to save up for hotels. And luckily, I won't have to fly anywhere because my buddy lives up there, so I'll only have to drive, which won't be a bad drive. I've done it before, and it's not bad at all. So that's a more doable like WrestleMania trip as opposed to like us booking this far in advance. And the whole like, does buying one ticket get you only access to one night of the event? And I think that's how it works, ladies and gentlemen. You buy. WWE is going to try to double dip and get revenue like for both nights. So I think if you buy one ticket, it's for one night of WrestleMania, not for both, unless you get like a travel package deal, or if you just buy a whole like combo set of tickets. So yeah, next year, Dallas, Texas. The only thing I don't like is the logo. And again, I'm a stickler and I look at all these little details only because it's framed in the colors of the Dallas Cowboys. Blech. If y'all know me, you know how I feel about the Dallas Cowboys. More specifically, Cowboys Nation. But that's like a little nitpick. It's still WrestleMania. It'll be fun next April. Gonna look forward to try to get there. It's an expensive ticket, but it'll be worth it. Because again, if you've never experienced a WrestleMania live, there is nothing like it. And I've done it once, and I want to do it again. So yeah, looking forward to that. So before I get to my top 5 matches of this past WrestleMania week, let's talk about Stone Cold Steve Austin's Broken Skull Sessions, which has become one of my favorite shows to watch on the network as far as like original content is concerned. It's a form of a podcast, but obviously it's done in a studio and it's filmed, so you get to see both people. So Stone Cold Steve Austin has been interviewing, wrestlers from the past and, from the current roster. And there are these like really fun conversations, and some of them go like past 2 hours. But if you're like a super diehard wrestling fan, like you learn a lot of cool stuff. And most these days, people think that it's all like the high flyers and the work rate and all that stuff, and they think that that's all that what makes like a good wrestler. Like there's so much more to it. It's about character. It's about charisma. It's about the little things that you do. It's the things that you tweak to your character and all that stuff. And hearing about all these little stories about what people do to enhance their character or just make little subtle differences that just make for an overall better presentation of their character. That's what Stone Cold dives into with these shows. So if you want to learn more about these wrestlers and, how they started and how they moved up in the business, like I encourage you to watch Stone Cold Steve Austin's show, The Broken Skull Session, which you can watch on Peacock. What was interesting about this week's new episode, and I talked about this with Brandon and Raul last week on our WrestleMania shows, he was going to be having on Chris Jericho, who we all know had been a part of WWE for a very long time. But as of right now, he's working with another wrestling promotion, quote unquote, the competitor, but not really, at least not yet. They're still in their infancy stages, but he's working right now for All Elite Wrestling, which is another major wrestling company that's on a major channel. They're on TNT. So it's kind of like the competition in a way. So Jericho appearing on a WWE themed show while working for another company is a huge deal for wrestling fans. Like it's almost like they're entering this crossover world. That's what we're in now, right? Everything has to cross over. You look at what Marvel's done. You look at what TV shows are doing now these days. The Law and Order and the Grey's Anatomies. Like they all do crossovers with their shows on the same network. So it's interesting to see that Jericho was allowed to be on this show and actually discuss All Elite Wrestling a little bit. So, and not in a way where like they belittled them or anything like that. Like, Stone Cold won't do that. He's He's very true to himself, and he's very, will ask like the right questions. He's not going to make the other company look bad. But it was very interesting to see Jericho and Austin talk about another wrestling company on a WWE themed show. Now you can say, well, they talk about WCW and AWA and all that stuff, but WWE now owns all of that property, so it's okay for them to talk about. Like, they don't own anything with All Elite Wrestling, so that's just free promotion for them. But also it's cool on WWE's part because, I think in the world that we're in now, like, you can't really shy away from things like that. The fans are just too smart now, and I think the audience as a whole is just too smart. So to try to ignore that there's another wrestling promotion out there on a mainstream level is, I think, ludicrous. And the fact that Stone Cold Steve Austin got Vince McMahon's permission to do this is a little bit of a sign that he's kind of maybe open to the idea of, maybe doing something down the line with All Elite Wrestling. Who knows? I mean, that's a wrestling fan's dream, and it would be good business for both brands. But the fact that this even happened is, to me, it's a miracle. Just because we all know the history with Vince McMahon and the way he would treat competition and act like they don't exist and never acknowledging them. So this was real cool. So, anyways, Jericho and Austin had a really good conversation, and they covered some AEW stuff, which I know everyone was probably dying for, but I was more interested in the stuff that Jericho likes to give, the little backstories, because I guess I've been following his entire career, at least for the most part in WWE. I covered all of it, or I watched all of it. So it was nice to hear these backstories on little things he would do, ideas, and all these things, all the major stuff that you've ever seen on WWE television regarding him, including his debut when he interrupted The Rock on Monday Night Raw, like the stories behind that and all that stuff is just really fun. And it's great to learn more about these characters and more about how much this business is just so hard. Like, I everybody always gives me shit for being a wrestling fan and, it's fake and all that stuff. And it's like, gosh, it's just a form of entertainment, guys. It's like no different than the Avengers or Marvel. Like, none of that stuff is real, but yet you get a kick out of it. You enjoy it. It's the same for me. But nobody realized how hard it is to be a professional wrestler, because there's not only there's elements of athleticism, there's theatrics. So there's, it's not the best acting, but people have to pull off characters. So they somewhat have to know how to perform in that way. They have to, perform in front of a live audience. They have to go on live TV where anything can happen. Mistakes happen. So there's added pressure on that. There's learning how to perform in front of a camera. It's not just doing the wrestling moves. It's, knowing which camera to look at and which camera to pose at and all. There's all these different factors. And I love hearing these wrestlers talk about all that stuff. Like, it makes me think man, I would love to try this out as a profession. Now, I don't know if I could handle the athleticism part of it. I don't know if my body could hold up, taking moves like that. And I know people like to say it's fake, but the people who have ever said that to me in my life, I say, get your ass in a ring and take like a suplex or take a fall in that ring and then tell me it's fake. So I don't know if my body could handle that part of it, but I would so be up for it. And I think I could totally get into, building a character and having to perform and talk in front of an audience and do, promotion to hype up your match. I can get into all that. Like, I feel like I would be really good at it. Obviously now I think it's just too late for me to get into something like that. Usually in wrestling, you want to start out like super younger, so that way, your body could get used to the wear and tear of living that kind of life. I think if I were to start now, even if I were to get in the most ridiculous shape of my life, like, I'm already at an age where, your body responds differently to stuff. Taking a fall to your knee is different at 34, 35, as opposed to in your early 20s. You can just get up like nothing, whereas opposed to now, it's the slightest tweak or the slightest movement and you can mess up something entirely and you can be in pain for days or weeks or months or whatever. So yeah, I think it's a little late for me on that, but that's one of the biggest reasons why I love watching these shows, because I love hearing these stories of all these wrestlers and all these things that they do and to prepare, and the mental aspect of it is pretty crazy, because living a WWE lifestyle is it's a grind. I'll say that. And I'm in a profession where like our business is open, 365, we never close, except for the pandemic where we closed for a little bit, but we've been back open. So for the most part, we're consistently open all the time and always on the go. So not that I say I know what it's like, because I don't, because they have to travel from town to town, country to country, even across continents and all that stuff. So I can only imagine what life is like for a professional wrestler. And I encourage for those of you that like to just slight that it's like nothing and just think it's like, oh, it's fake, like they fake fall and all these things. Like, just go, like, watch the WWE Network on Peacock. Watch a lot of these behind-the-scenes documentaries and listen to the stories on Stone Cold Steve Austin's Broken Skull sessions. Like, you're going to learn some things. Like, it really is hard to be a professional wrestler. But yeah, the Jericho episode was a lot of fun. It's over 2 hours, but it's just a treat for me as a diehard fan. So it was nice to hear those stories. And again, super cool to hear about All Elite Wrestling on a WWE show. Like, this is 2021, folks. Like, the floodgates have been open with something like that. So we'll see if something down the road were to happen. But just know the door, it's been opened. So that's the fun part. Anyways, let's get to WrestleMania week. Like I said, it's not like the whole thing was spectacular. There was some duds, but I've compiled a list of top 5 matches that I've enjoyed that were, of course, involving WrestleMania, the show itself, and NXT TakeOver, which was on Wednesday and Thursday, and also available on Peacock on demand if you can go back and watch anytime you want. I wanted to incorporate that as well because they're a part of now of the WrestleMania week. It's just a whole long, event of all these different things going on. But yeah, this is my standouts of WrestleMania this past week. So at number 5, it's the main event of night 2 of WrestleMania, which was actually yesterday, and that was the Universal Championship match. Triple threat, Roman Reigns defending against Daniel Bryan and Edge. Fantastic match. The reason why this match is not higher up on my list is just because I've kind of grown tired of the chaos effect that goes into a triple threat match, where it used to be they would never acknowledge the triple threat match as a no disqualification thing. It was kind of like just 3 wrestlers doing their thing. That's why I kind of like the earlier version when WWE introduced the triple threat match, and it would just be 3 guys going at it, wrestling, and not really like using weapons and all that stuff. Like, you think about Vengeance 2002, The Rock, Kurt Angle, and The Undertaker, where it was just them like just using all of their best skill sets, and it was just them trying to top one each other, like wrestling wise. There was not, chairs and all these things being brought into the fold. Nowadays, when they do a triple threat match, they so emphasize the no disqualification part of it. So you'll have a lot of interference, you'll have a lot of weapons usage, breaking of the tables and all that stuff. And I enjoy that stuff, but I enjoy it when it's brought out sporadically and not every single time. So in this match, there was a lot of interference from Jey Uso at the beginning a lot, and then towards the end, which ended up in the final result. But then there was also the usage of so much chairs and, weapons. And I know fans like the violent aspect of it, but I'm an old school guy. I enjoy just let your wrestling tell the story to this audience. And especially when you got guys like Edge and Daniel Bryan in there who know how to wrestle and put on a good wrestling match. You add in Roman Reigns in there and they can make him look good. And I think that would have been enough to make this a fantastic just wrestling match. And had it been just that, this would have been higher up on the list, if not probably number 1. Well, probably not, because we all know what my number 1's going to be, but I won't spoil it. But yeah, it was still a super entertaining match. It had me on the edge of my seat because out of these 3, really anybody could have won. And usually nowadays, you kind of know what the result is going to be as far as like who's going to win. It's kind of become a little bit predictable over these last couple of years. So it was nice to have a main event where it's like, man, any one of these guys could walk out as a champion and it would be believable. Roman Reigns ended up retaining, which I had predicted, as well as Brandon on the WrestleMania pre-show or pre-rundown of the card that we did last week. We both said that Roman Reigns was the right person to win this match. Now, was he going to win cleanly or whatnot? And like I mentioned, there was a lot of interference from Jey Uso, who's, the cousin and the right-hand man, as he so had it, blatantly stated on his t-shirt. He did a lot of interference at the beginning of the match, and then towards the end, had a lot to do with Roman Reigns getting the upper hand and pinning both Daniel Bryan and Edge. So Daniel Bryan was laid out first, and then Edge was laid out, and Roman Reigns throws Edge on top of Daniel Bryan, and Roman Reigns covered both of them. Now, could there be some controversy that comes out of this? You could have Edge covered Daniel Bryan as well, but Edge's shoulders were on the mat, so the way they placed them kind of made it seem like Roman just straight up beat everybody. And it's not like he cheated, even though he did cheat with interference, because it's no disqualification, folks. That's just the way, WWE likes to, explicitly point that out. So, yeah, Roman Reigns comes out on top in a very fun match, and crowd was into it. That plays a lot into it, with it's a whole part of the show, right? The crowd is a huge factor in determining, at least for me, whether, a match gets elevated from good to great. And this was one of the great matches of this past weekend, but it's at my number 5. At number 4, I got Cesaro versus Seth Rollins, and two guys that I don't really care for. One, Cesaro, because he's just a guy that I just can't get behind because he has no character. And Seth Rollins, just because he annoys me with his antics, and his characters have been whatever to me. But I knew at the end of the day, and I said this on the countdown show, the rundown show, I knew this was going to be a good wrestling match, because that's what these guys are. They're good wrestlers in the end, despite their lack of character development or being the strongest of characters. They can pull it off wrestling wise. And you add in the live crowd, and they were so into Cesaro, which they've always been. But me, I never understood the Cesaro thing other than the wrestling. But to me, I think there's more to it. But nonetheless, they delivered a really fantastic match. The two standouts, of course, was Cesaro breaking the swing record, and so that got the crowd super involved. And then he did a thing called the UFO, where he was spinning Seth Rollins on top of his shoulders without holding him. So he was spinning super hard, and Rollins is just there, laying perfectly horizontal on his shoulders. So that was a cool little visual, and it was a fun match. So I liked it. It's my number 4. And again, no shenanigans, no weapons or anything like that. Just a straight up wrestling match. I'm old school like that. So those matches are always going to get a little bit more of a pop from me. Number 3, Kevin Owens versus Sami Zayn, which the build up to was pretty lame, including the inclusion of YouTube star Logan Paul, which I don't really know much about him or what he's all about, but I know he's popular on the internet. All I know is that I think he's the boxing guy who's threatened a couple of people, but whatever. It's more eyeballs on the product, so I'll always accept that. If they're going to bring more eyes, more viewership, especially with today's generation where I don't know who the big, celebrities are. I can mention it now, Bad Bunny, I guess apparently is a super huge star that I have no idea. I'd never heard of him until I saw him appear on a WWE show, and I was like, who is this guy? But apparently he's real big around the world. He's a huge music star, and I'm sure there were a lot of eyeballs on his match, and it got a lot of mainstream notoriety. So I'm not gonna question the Bad Bunnies and the Logan Pauls, because I know I'm up there in age already, as far as I know I'm not that young anymore. So who am I to say oh, well, that's stupid. Why are they involving this person? They have nothing to do. But WrestleMania and WWE have had celebrities involved throughout the history of their existence. So, the Logan Paul thing, whatever. It was a weird build, kind of a sped up, little feud that they threw together with Owens and Zayn, where it kind of didn't make sense, but you knew the day of that these guys can deliver a match. These guys go back, it's the days of Ring of Honor and on the indies. These guys have wrestled each other multiple times, so you knew you were going to get a nice little match out of them at WrestleMania. The question is, was there going to be enough time for them to do stuff? And they got a decent amount of time, and they pulled off a pretty nice little match that got the crowd into it, and it was on night 2 of WrestleMania, and it was the first really good match of the night, because night 2, I'll say was nowhere near the magic that night 1 was able to develop, and it had really taken an hour plus until like these two showed up and had a decent WrestleMania match. Will it be remembered as an all-timer? No, they've had better matches than this. But as far as like getting the crowd back into it and pulling, a rabbit out of their ass, as far as like giving us a really decent WrestleMania match, this passes and it makes it on my list. As far as like everything else that happened, like, yeah, it shows up as number 3 just because Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn can always deliver on the mat. Number 2, this is from NXT TakeOver Night 1. It was for the NXT UK Championship, and that was Walter defending against Tommaso Ciampa. Now, I had watched none of this build-up on NXT because, of course, I'd been in and out of wrestling, before WrestleMania, actually the last couple of months, so I haven't really kept up week by week on what was going on as far as, like, the build-up. I'm sure it was okay, but the match itself I knew for some reason was going to deliver because Walter is usually good at having good championship matches on pay-per-view events or the takeovers and whatnot. And Tommaso Ciampa's always game whenever it comes to matches like this. He usually amps it up to another level. And this was a hard-hitting match. Like, I'm talking chops and clotheslines that you just felt like, man, these are like as real can get. Just a really, really fun match, back and forth. It was totally, if I remember correctly, I think the entire match was inside the ring, and it was just super hard hitting and just old school style, the way I like, the big guy against the little guy, but it was the little guy giving the big guy a run for his money, and Walter ends up winning this match on a chop of all things. I love it when wrestlers hit their finishing moves, but when it ends on something like that, like randomly, like a huge chop, that just goes to show you the effect of how hard hitting, especially when Walter gives them, go watch that, or just search up Walter on YouTube and search Walter chop, and I guarantee you some of these chops that he delivers, man, I know I would want to try to be a wrestler, but I would not want to take a chop from that guy to the chest, because they're brutal. But it was a fun match. Probably it's going to be underrated where, there's the diehards know that was one of the best matches of the week, but overall, they're probably going to talk more about the Kyle O'Reilly, Adam Cole sanction match, which was fine. But again, I'm kind of over these gimmick matches and the chaos factor and weapons. I just love good old fashioned, old school wrestling. Just give me that as the build up for a feud, and it'll deliver, I promise you. So Walter versus Ciampa on NXT TakeOver Night 1. Go check it out. It's one of the best of the takeovers that they put on in recent memory. And then we come to number 1, which should shock nobody. Some people I've seen don't have this as their number 1. They have the Universal title match as their number 1, which, again, people like the violence, the chaos, so I can see why. But from a diehard wrestling fan purist, there was nothing better this weekend than the main event of Night 1 of WrestleMania. Sasha Banks, the SmackDown Women's Champion, defending against Bianca Belair. It lived up to everything I hoped it would be. The build-up, it was weird, whatever. There was some bumps in the road, but I knew the day of WrestleMania, if they can get this video package correct, I knew the match was going to deliver, whatnot. But the video package, the way they presented it, just gave it this huge big fight feel. And I predicted it exactly right, where there was none of the shenanigans that had been building up for these last couple of months where they were, a de facto tag team going after the tag titles and, turning on one another or whatever. All of that weird BS that just didn't need to be there for this match, because you had Bianca Belair, who won the Women's Royal Rumble, and then she challenges Sasha Banks straight up. That's your story right there. And all the video package had to do was show Sasha as a badass throughout the years, her dominance as a female competitor in WWE, which they did show. They showed her through NXT and through her run on the main roster. And then you have Bianca Belair. You show her Royal Rumble win. And then you show her as this badass coming up, and you're showing her all her strengths, her little gimmick, the EST, the roughest, the toughest, the fastest, all that stuff. And you show all these little things that have her building up, and their war of words of them being, the best over one another. Just a classic WrestleMania build, the best versus the best. You go back to Hogan versus Warrior at WrestleMania 6. You know, Shawn Michaels versus Bret Hart, WrestleMania 12. Stone Cold Steve Austin versus The Rock. And now you have like this generation's version of that. It was Bianca Belair, the up-and-comer, you know, the rookie, even though she's been there a couple of years already. And then Sasha Banks, who's like the top of her game. And like, it's one of those like they're destined to meet each other and destined to fight at some point. And, yes, Sasha was kind of quote unquote the heel / bad guy going into this, but that's the way you always kind of have to do it as far as like when you're doing the wrestling match, because it's hard to do two good guys in the same arena, at least these days. In the 90s, you pulled it off with Hogan and Warrior, but that was a different time. Now it's like you really have to present one of them as the bad guy. So Sasha Banks, you could tell, was playing the heel in this role, and Bianca as the underdog, like challenger, and they just put on a spectacular. And I'm again, I said this on social media. I'm not being prisoner of the moment when I say these ladies pulled off one of the greatest main events in the history of WrestleMania. Like this is going to go down as an all-timer. Like, you know, no offense to Becky Lynch, Charlotte, and Ronda Rousey at WrestleMania 35. They were the first ones to do it as far as like the main event to close out the show. But the match was kind of clunky when you went back and watched it. Like, it's still really good, but there's a lot of clunkiness to it. This match, to me, played out perfectly. Like, they were going for stuff. They were trying stuff that I hadn't seen in matches done with them before. And they were pulling it off spectacularly. Like, everything, like, just felt like it was all the stars aligned for it to make it such a beautiful and memorable match. And it had a definitive finish. And the only thing that botched it was stupid Michael Cole. So Bianca Belair hits her finish at the end of the match, the KOD, and she pins Sasha clean 1, 2, 3. And as soon as they ring the bell, Michael Cole on commentary says, Sasha kicked out, Sasha kicked out. And Corey Graves has to quickly like correct him, saying like, no, she didn't. Like, Bianca's the champion. And that was the only thing that ruined this perfect moment. So I don't know if they're going to dub it whenever they edit this show, which I know they're gonna heavily edit WrestleMania, because there was a lot of stuff that didn't go right. But it's gonna be interesting to see how they try to dub over that call, because it's Michael Cole literally like yelling that as Bianca Belair is winning. So it was a weird end to that match on a commentary side. Everything else, like what those ladies did in that ring, was tremendous. Even going back to the way the match started. Like, just the significance of it. Like, yes, it was the first time ever two African American women headlining not only a WrestleMania, but just two black women headlining a wrestling show was big in itself. And it wasn't like something that was like, they hammered down Becky, Charlotte, and Ronda as like, yeah, women are going to main event for the first time. Like, they threw it down your throats. It deserved the main event, but the way they went about promoting it was kind of like thrown in your face. This organically just happened within the final like day or two, where they announced like that they were going to close the show. But it felt like it was earned. Like, it was just a classic build-up, as far as like the way it was presented on the show, not the classic build-up if you watch the actual SmackDown television show. So this is kind of going into my theory where, you know, you can kind of skip out on the television because the pay-per-views itself, like, haven't been as bad. And they'll tell a different story than what's actually presented on TV. So again, if you watch this WrestleMania match with Sasha and Bianca, it's presented as if it was like the perfect build-up. And the video package sells that. But that's not the way it was played out. But if you skip all of that and you just watch this, you're like, oh shit, that was a fucking awesome match. Awesome build. Like, two superstars like right at their prime, and they collided and they just had a great wrestling match. And there was no shenanigans either. Like, the only weapon you can say that was used was Bianca Belair's hair, but that's part of her. So is it really a weapon? You can use it as one, but it's not really considered one. And the psychology as far as the way it was used, and Sasha using it to her advantage throughout the match until it finally backfired and it got used on her in a clip that's going to be, you know, on WrestleMania, like video, you know, packages forever. It's Bianca Belair whipping Sasha Banks with her hair on like her ribs. And like the sound of it was just so incredible to the point where I'm like, did they add in that sound effect? But I think no, like Bianca Belair's hair just gave that sound effect like as organic and it was just so real. And even the welt, I think it's how you say it. Welt? Is that how you say it? On Sasha's like rib, you could see it after the match, and it was like, holy crap! Like she like laid into her like hard. But nonetheless, this was the best match. Yeah, I want to go back to the beginning. Yeah, the whole historical significance of it and the fact that it was the main event and it wasn't shoved down her throat. It just felt super organic. Crowd got on its feet at the beginning of the match and applauded these ladies because everybody understood the significance of it. And what made Bianca Belair's run here like really special, and this goes back to her win at the Royal Rumble, where she didn't do like this scripted like robotic promo the way all of WWE has become. It was very organic. She was crying and, you know, saying thank you to her family and all that stuff. And it just felt like so real. Like it was her. Like, yes, she's still the character, but all the emotion and all the, you know, the crying and all that stuff, it was her. And it felt organic and real. And that's part of what makes wrestling great and how we connect with those superstars is when you get those real moments. You know, we all connected with Stone Cold Steve Austin because he lived vicariously through us. Like who didn't want to like beat the shit out of their, you know, annoying boss or, you know, whatever, or, you know, kick ass, throw beers and throw the middle finger in the air and just not caring. And, you know, we all lived through that. We wanted to be that. So when you can find a connection like that, the way the audience found with Bianca Belair, like when I saw her win the Royal Rumble and I immediately pointed to that promo she did, it's like, holy shit, like that got me emotional and got me to care about her win. Like it meant something. So we come to the beginning of this match and her and Sasha are facing off and Bianca Belair is on the verge of crying before the match even starts because she's soaking in. Not only is like this her first WrestleMania, she's in the main event. Like that's a huge deal. And maybe she got overwhelmed in the moment, but the emotion of it felt real and like it was earned. So like you want to cheer for her, you want to see her win. But also it meant a lot to Sasha Banks, who had always was this like, you know, pioneer as far as like getting this women's revolution going. She's been a huge part of it. Like she's automatic Hall of Famer for life just because she's been in a lot of firsts throughout this entire run in WWE. But yeah, you can tell even she wanted to cry at the beginning of this match, but she was holding it together as her character, the boss. But you could tell it was there, and that's what made the moment even bigger for these ladies, and just the whole night and the audience clapping and applauding before the match even began was a huge deal. And it just, gave it that big fight feel, like it was earned. Like everything about this was so fucking perfect. I loved it. Where it's gonna go down all time as like WrestleMania main events, it'll probably be up there. I'm gonna have to re-examine all of that stuff, and that's fun to do, but I just want to throw it out there that this match is gonna be up there in conversation because not only just because of the historical significance of it, but the fact that they actually delivered an entertaining professional wrestling match where we had a definitive winner. There wasn't hijinks. It was just two ladies claiming to be the best and proving it against one another. Like that's what you fucking want in wrestling. Like it's simple storytelling. Why is this so hard for WWE sometimes? They sometimes overthink it and try to overproduce stuff. When you just have your stories right there, like two women wanting to be the best, like that's the easiest story you can tell. Let them duke it out in the ring. No interference, none of that shit. Just straight up professional wrestling. That's why when wrestling's like that, when those stars align and everything comes together, the characters that you got in the story, the match itself, the entrances, the grandeur of it all, like there's nothing fucking better than that. And I love that right there reminds me, like, that's why I love wrestling. So those hats off to both of those ladies. I know Bianca Belair is the new champion, but shit, like, fucking Sasha Banks has just gone higher on my list. Like, I love Becky Lynch a lot, but Sasha Banks, you know, she's the fucking real deal. And I knew it from the first time I saw her in NXT. I was like, this girl's, like, gonna be something. Like, and I know nobody will believe me, and even my best friend, like I said, I remember cheering Sasha Banks when she was, like, nothing. Like, I saw something in her. And I was like, man, like, if she gets to be this character, she's going to be, like, fucking one of the best. And she is. Sorry for all the cursing, but she's been that damn good. And she talks like it, but she backs it up. She's like a modern day, like, Shawn Michaels, like, where she talks all that shit like she's the best, but she backs it up in the ring. Like, it's incredible. One of the greatest main events in WrestleMania history. I could easily say like this past decade, it's been like the best. You know, you can go back and look at Daniel Bryan's run at WrestleMania 30, but you know, there was some hiccups on that as well. But this was just, everything was beautiful and perfect about it. Like, people are going to nitpick it. Oh, there's some stuff they didn't do right. Or, you know, I was listening to Brian Alvarez on Wrestling Observer, and he said that this match was sloppy. Like, what the fuck is he talking about? Like, I know he likes to nitpick WWE, but how could he say it was sloppy? Or, like, everything flowed, I think, perfectly. I have to watch it again. I saw it twice, I know that, and I didn't see any, you know, sloppiness in it. But, you know, and y'all could call me recency bias, prisoner of the moment. I've been watching wrestling for over 20 years, and that right there is going to be an all-time, like, this will be in the video packages for years to come. Like, they've earned that into the lore of WWE, at least. Like, they'll be remembered forever. So thank you, Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair, for giving me one of the greatest wrestling matches I've seen, and I want to see it again down the line. You don't have to do it right away. They probably will, because WWE, when they got something that happens good, they like to kill the shit out of it and do it over and over again. But I would love to see these ladies again hook up. I'd love to see them do an Iron Woman match. I mean, with these two, they could do it, and it would be tremendous. And I'm not talking 30 minutes. I'm talking give them an hour, and let's see what they cook, because they can do it. Like, the women are just that far ahead right now as far as the men goes. Like, WWE, like, the women are the best part of the show. Like, bar none. Like, I can say that with 100% confidence. Like, they are just above and beyond the best thing going for WWE. And if it wasn't for that, I don't know how much I'd be into it right now, because they've been like that little tiny string of hope for me, like, that have kept me on, like, watching, like, as a diehard fan. So thank you, WWE women, but specifically for this weekend, Bianca Belair, Sasha Banks, thank you so much for this awesome WrestleMania main event. I'll never forget it. And those are my top 5 matches of the week. So go check those out. They're available on Peacock on demand. I think so. I'm not sure how their expiration date, or they'll take stuff off at certain points. We're in whole new territory here. In WWE Network, you can just, when it was its standalone service, you can just watch it at, like, you know, whenever you want it. But now that it's on Peacock, I don't know if there's going to be times where they'll, you know, take stuff off. Like, you know, usually Netflix, you know, oh, this is your last chance to watch whatever, and then it leaves, and then it comes back months later. So I don't know if they're going to do stuff like that. So we're in new territory. We'll see how it goes. But as of right now, all that stuff is available on demand, and you can watch it now. Yeah. When we come back, I'm going to wrap up my final thoughts on what I didn't like about the show, and some breaking news that I found out today in the world of the NFL. So, little sad news, but I'll talk about that after the break. This is Palace Off the Top Rope. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show, and this has been a heavily, like, WrestleMania type show, and I know it's come and gone, and it's one time a year, so that's why there's a lot of coverage on it. So this is probably the most wrestling you'll get out of this podcast, at least for the year, and it's going to be interesting to see, like, whether I pay attention or not, like, post this. Like, I'll watch the Raw after WrestleMania tonight, which is always usually an entertaining show, because you have sometimes new people that debut and fresh storylines that start off this is quote unquote like the new season of WWE. WrestleMania is always like the end of the season. So that's, everything culminates to that, and then everything kind of starts like fresh. It's been kind of lackluster these last couple of years, but we'll see if they pull something out. Like, they're going to have a new announce team, and, you know, they've been needing to change up the announce team for a while now, because I love Tom Phillips, but for the most part, he's gotten pretty bad on Raw these last couple of months, at least last couple of years. Like, he's been pretty bad. So it needs a fresher sound. The show in general just needs to change. Like, it's been the same presentation for like over 20 years, and they need to do something different. Now, I know Vince McMahon is still at the helm, so like until like he, you know, steps aside, resigns, or passes away, and he's up there in age, at some point, everyone's everyone's going to pass at some point. It's just life. Until then, we're still probably going to see the same type of show, but a new announced team, so they're going to freshen things up with that. Let's talk about some of the stuff that didn't play well on WrestleMania. Actually, one last good thing, and it was a disaster to start because it was an outside event, right, at Raymond James Stadium, open field, football field. Tampa Bay Buccaneers play there. Florida, weather's usually, hit and miss. Like, there'll be times where it rains crazy and then, like, it'll be sunny in, like, the next couple of hours post that. So there was rain on WrestleMania Saturday and Sunday to the point where they had a weather delay. And we've never seen a WrestleMania open up like that. So you had the incredible opening with Vince and, they did America the Beautiful and they had this amazing video package. Like, holy shit, WrestleMania is back. Audience is back. And what's the first thing that happens? There's like no pyro. And it cuts immediately to Michael Cole and the announce team. And they're like, oh, okay, WrestleMania's on a weather delay. We're going to have to wait a bit. And you see like the fans exiting the Raymond James Stadium, at least to like the safe part of the stadium. So it was on weather delay for like about 30 minutes. So this was actually like a real sports broadcast. This has happened in football games where they go on a weather delay, whether there's lightning in the area or whatever, and they have to pause and, the broadcasters have to like kind of like ad lib and just talk about, whatever. So what WWE did at this point, and it was interesting, is they cut to random like interviews in the backstage area. So you had like Shane McMahon, Braun Strowman, Drew and Bobby Lashley facing off, The New Day, Seth Rollins, and I think Kevin Owens were the other people that they interviewed, as well as like cutting back and forth to Michael Cole and Samoa Joe, who were covered in like ponchos because of all of the rain. And it was nice to see because all these interviews were not scripted and robotics. It was really like cut off on the fly. Like, who's going to be able to perform in chaos? And we're going to see which wrestlers are able to speak on the mic and who are the ones that like they have no business. Like, they should have a script because they have no business cutting off the fly. Even though if you're a professional wrestler, at least in my opinion, you need to know how to talk. And yes, you can have people like, supervise you or whatever, but for them to write your entire promo as a wrestler, like, no, like a real wrestler, professional wrestler, at least in my eyes, has to know how to talk from the heart and from the gut. And you saw these in some of these promos, like specifically Kevin Owens and Drew McIntyre, even MVP, these guys that just know how to talk. But then you came to guys like Braun Strowman where it looked like they were so out of their element because they're used to a script. And they were able to pull off a little something, but you could tell who are the real OGs and who are the ones that need they need a script in their hands to learn and rehearse. So it was a nice little 30-minute delay interrupted segment that was part of the WrestleMania broadcast. They could have easily cut away to something like a black screen and Peacock saying we'll be right back in just a moment or whatever. But no, Vince McMahon likes to have the show go on and they improv on the fly. So I give credit to those wrestlers and stuff that were involved in all of that. And hopefully, whenever they release it on home video and all that stuff, they keep all of that in there because it was nice. It was a nice different from the norm that we usually get. So now they could easily edit all of that out, and it starts off with the championship match, which it ended up being Drew McIntyre and Bobby Lashley. But I would love for them to keep that in there because it was so organic and so different, and it was just, again, adapting to chaos, and the best people do that. In my profession, I always teach, you cannot be robotic and you can't be, so by the book all the time because there's gonna be situations where you're gonna have to adapt and you're gonna have to improvise. And the best ones can do it. And the others will just they'll totally fail and they'll look like geeks. So it was nice to see that. That was a fun start to it, even though we wanted to see the wrestling matches and all that stuff. It was an interesting way to start the show. And again, it was out of their hands. It's all they could do, but they did the best with it. So that was I wanted to at least put a thumbs up on that. So good job, WWE. Anybody else would have fallen apart. Sports is easy because you can just stay on the announcers and they can talk, debate and all that stuff. It's easy for them to come up with just topics to talk about while they go through that. But WWE just scrambled and kept cutting back and forth to the different wrestlers. Great job. Please keep that in the broadcast and keep it on your home video release because I do still collect my physical media copies of WrestleMania. I own every single one from 1 through 36. So when you release 37, Keep it on there. Please, I'm begging you. It's great content. It wasn't bad. Speaking of what was bad, let's talk about Bad Bunny a little bit. And I'm gonna defend Brandon McLaughlin here a little bit. And yes, Bad Bunny did overachieve by his standards as far as like performing in an actual wrestling match. It ended up being a tag match. When we covered this, it was still going to be a one-on-one match between The Miz and Bad Bunny, but that would have been a disaster. But that's ended up with being most of this match, even though it was a tag. But Bad Bunny did he performed like 90% of the match. He did good. He had some spots which are going to be in WrestleMania packages forever. He does the Canadian Destroyer. He jumps off the top rope. That's fine. But everybody making this out to be like, oh yeah, wow, this is the greatest like celebrity, wrestler to ever come in out of, not being in the norm, and he comes and does a match. This is recency bias, okay? This is a prisoner of the moment thing. It was only just later in the latter part of last year where a guy named Pat McAfee, and yes, this guy was a former NFL punter, he's an actual athlete, but this guy came out of the sports world to come do a pro wrestling match. And he did not one, but two. He did a one-on-one with Adam Cole. Pat McAfee is who I'm talking about. The greatest debut I've ever seen. He understood the business from top to bottom as far as cutting promos. He had a character. He was easily the best thing going last year on NXT in the latter part of the year. And then they put him into one of the most dangerous matches that WWE produced, and it's called the War Games, where it's basically two wrestling rings trapped in barricaded by a steel cage, and you can use weapons and all that stuff. And he was in that, and he did fucking tremendous in it. Like Pat McAfee was just he was kind of like a Kurt Angle, like a real athlete coming in, fish out of water, have never done wrestling, and he just adapted quickly and did tremendous. Like that to me was the greatest, best celebrity coming in, because Pat McAfee is kind of more like a celebrity now. He has his own podcast show, which you can listen to. It's a great show. I follow. It's awesome. Pat McAfee did a great job and all that stuff. But you coming into NXT, sir, that was for this wrestling fan right here, that was a treat. It was a delight. Not just the wrestling wise. I mean, I know you bought your own ring and you trained and a lot of stuff, and you were doing all this incredible stuff in the ring. But not only that, you were the complete package, my friend. You had the charisma, the promo work. You knew how to talk like a villain. You got it, sir. And I would love to see you back someday on the main stage. I would have loved to have seen you perform at WrestleMania. That would have been something. Everybody would have been talking about you, sir. So yes, Bad Bunny did great. Everybody's prisoner of the moment. Oh my God, Bad Bunny, it was the greatest thing ever for a celebrity. No, go back to NXT and watch Pat McAfee. I know it was on a smaller scale, with a television audience not as big, but that was the best celebrity / athlete or whatever, the outsider you could say. I won't even say celebrity, outsider that just doesn't do this normally. And he came in there and he did a fucking tremendous job from top to bottom, the whole package. Bad Bunny did cool stuff. Fans are probably going to remember that more because it was on WrestleMania and they'll be able to replay that over and over. But let us not forget, and I won't forget, Pat McAfee, man, you were fucking tremendous. I won't let people forget that. So yes, Pat McAfee is still the best outsider to come out and do this thing. So pump the brakes, everybody, on Bad Bunny. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go to Peacock, search NXT, search Pat McAfee, or search it on YouTube. I'm sure it's there. This guy was the real deal. Okay, so that was whatever, right? With Bad Bunny, that was fine, whatever. Night one was for sure the better night of the two. It felt more, there was an aura to it that just felt a lot more stars aligning. Night two kind of felt more like the same old WWE we've seen. It kicked off with Randy Orton versus The Fiend. I mean, what a weird way to start WrestleMania, right? With these two guys in this blood death feud, and specifically death because somebody was burnt to a crisp in this feud. So all of this happening, right? Black goo coming out of Randy Orton's mouth, all this satanic stuff going into it. You figured they were going to have some type of gimmick match, right? A street fight, no holds barred, no DQ, whatever, right? Put something on it. No, this was a straight up wrestling match. And this is like an ass backwards like type of storytelling, because usually the wrestling match is what starts it, and then eventually you end up in some type of gimmicked, match, whether it be a no DQ or a cage or a Hell in the Cell or whatever, right? That's usually how it goes. That's standard wrestling booking 101. That's always the blow off. It's always like a huge like gimmick type thing. No, they went backwards, where they did the gimmick match first, and then they just worked their way to WrestleMania, and here we are, one-on-one match, opened up. You had the red lighting, which nobody's a fan of. This goes back to even when Kane did it back in the day. It was just like a gloomy start to WrestleMania. The Fiend had a nice entrance, which was about all you can say that was good about this match. Just horrible booking. And the Fiend, you can say he was the babyface, the good guy, but the character is just weird. Like, why would you cheer that? Like, just the whole satanic and demon stuff out of it. Like, whatever. It's not for me. I'm kind of over the gimmick, but whatever. But anyway, he had been built as the good guy leading into this, having been burned, and is he going to come back, and is he going to get his revenge on Randy Orton? And he loses after all that build. Where, it's easy wrestling booking 101. The heel gets his way throughout the most of the feud and the build up to it, and the babyface gets his revenge on the biggest stage. And no, they failed with that. Like, they did the same thing to Drew McIntyre, even though I think Bobby Lashley is a strong like heel champion, but Drew McIntyre gets his first match back in front of live fans. He won the title last year in front of nobody, so you figure this was a good opportunity to put the belt back on him and give him like that huge pop that he deserves, because he's been working his ass off, like being kind of like the top, quote unquote, one of the top guys of the company. And they beat him like cleanly, like they had him pass out. Like, I know he didn't technically tap out and give up, but he still lost. And that was the first match back in front of fans. Oh man, what a way for Vince to be in the bag and just laughing like, ha 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 ha. We thought we were going to give him a happy start to the show and a good feeling. And no, it's just typical WWE booking. They like to swerve you sometimes for like no reason. But as a wrestling fan, like for a long time, sometimes it's okay to be predictable and give us the predictable finish. Let us pop for a little bit. But I'm not going to be too mad about that one. But the Fiend stuff, like, I'm over that. And they had him lose again. Like, I know wins and losses don't matter in WWE, but at this point, like, you keep beating the Fiend all the time. Like, so what's even the point of him? Like, if he's so, like, indestructible and all this, but yet he can't win a match, like, the hell's going on? So I'm over that. I don't know what they're going to do with it. Towards the end of it, it looked like Alexa Bliss, who had been, like, under this spell or transformed into like this evil little like Chucky girl doll, and looked like she turned on Bray Wyatt or the Fiend at the end of this thing, and it was just like, it was weird. And then they both just disappeared. The crowd booed, and it was bad. It was a bad way to start night 2 of WrestleMania, and things just didn't get too much better after that until Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn saved the day. You had Bayley. I mean, one of the best workers like over the last couple of years, and over this last year, she's done like tremendous work with being a heel champion, and all the stuff with Sasha Banks was incredible. And then you have her here just like dressed up in a suit, being a geek all over the place. Everyone treating her like a joke. And there had been rumblings that Becky Lynch might be returning this weekend in a segment with her that they've kind of been building a little bit on SmackDown. Have you been watching? But I hadn't been, but I had heard that there was some teases of that. So you were thinking like, oh, okay, like this WWE could totally pay this off and have a segment where Becky Lynch comes back in front of fans and, sticks it to Bayley or whatever. But instead, they tease Bayley throughout night 1. Nothing happened. So I'm like, okay, cool. They're going to save it for night 2. And Becky Lynch, trolling all of us, was doing it on social media through Instagram and Twitter, and getting us all riled up. And again, that's our own fault for expectations, right? That's our fault. But how easily can WWE just deliver a moment like this to the fans and just have us go, yeah, that was awesome. It was a WrestleMania moment, because that's all WWE is about, right? When it comes to WrestleMania, it's not really so much about the matches anymore. It's just about creating a moment. And that would have been one. And instead, Bayley comes out, again, teased throughout the show. She comes out towards the end. And, she interrupts Titus and Hulk Hogan, like the worst co-hosts, like in the history of whenever they started doing co-hosts for this show, like they just had no business, like no charisma, like get them off my screen, please. And she comes out, so like, oh sweet, this is going to be it. This is going to be the moment where Bayley will come out to the ring and she'll do like her shtick, whatever, ding dong, hello, which is a cool little catchphrase, by the way. It's grown on me. She could have done all that, and then you could have Becky Lynch's music hit. The crowd will go fucking bananas, me and myself included, because Becky Lynch has been one of the, the staples of what kept WWE like relevant to me in my eyes over these last couple of years. What a dramatic return that would be right in front of fans. That'd be the first time we've seen her since she left to go, have a child. I know she's been training to come back. It's just a question of when is it going to happen. And WWE could have easily pulled this off and given us a tremendous moment, along with the main event with Bryan and Reigns and Edge. It just would have been, it would have capped off and it would have been all the buzz, but it was just kind of like a whatever. Like they the Bella Twins came out, which made no sense. They've been retired. They're in the Hall of Fame, yes, but they came out. They've been in retirement for a couple of years now, and they beat up Bayley. Like, what was the point? You made Bayley to look like the biggest geek, and she's been one of the strongest like female competitors that you've had over those last couple of years, especially after you turned her heel. Like, you made her out to be a nothing. And getting beat up by the Bella Twins, like, I like them, don't get me wrong. And my daughters will probably hate me because I'm talking mad shit about the Bellas right now. But they're just nothing right now. They're a bunch of nothings. And, I mean, they have their show and all that stuff, great. But, them beating up on Bayley, and the crowd was right to boo them. Because this would have been a moment to give us, like, Becky Lynch and have her return. And who knows if they'll do that tonight on Raw. And if she comes back, that'll be my one reason to stick around and keep watching post WrestleMania. Other than that, you'll see me back for SummerSlam. Forget all of this middle part as we build up to that. No. If she doesn't come back tonight, then expect me to return for SummerSlam. That's the next time you'll hear me talk about wrestling, unless AEW does something like tremendous or NXT or whatever. But yeah, an easy moment you could have given us as fans, and you failed on that. And again, if I was booking this show, that's an easy WrestleMania moment. Easy. You don't have John Cena. This is the first WrestleMania without John Cena since 2002. So you could give us, this is like one of the biggest names you have in your company, and you could have had her do something. Unless you're holding her off for something bigger that's going to happen tonight. That's the only exception to the rule. Because if you don't have her debut tonight, then what a wasted moment. Like you could have used her for that. Even if it was just for one night. She'll come back later down the road, but you could have had her come out one night to pop the crowd. It would have been huge. Easy 101, guys. Now, I've heard that maybe just because it might have leaked out there that this was a possibility, that WWE decided not to do it. But again, guys, WWE, this is not hard. Sometimes it's okay to be predictable and give the fans that easy moment. Like, it writes itself. It's not hard. Stop swerving us just to swerve. Makes no sense. I don't know. Just my thoughts on that. So night 2 is just a really big step down from night 1. And, they could have done some fun stuff with the women's tag team. You ended up having 2 heel teams go against each other, which was weird. Just weird decisions. Sheamus beating Riddle for the United States Championship. Riddle's the up-and-comer. That's your future star. Build around him. You go back to the well. WWE just likes to go back to the well with these big guys that they keep trying over and over and over again. Sheamus has been around since 2009. We're in 2021. Why are you putting that belt on him? It does nothing. It does nothing. Unless you're going to have him squashed by like Keith Lee. But why not just have Riddle carry the belt and have him feud with guys like Keith Lee and Cedric Alexander and Mustafa Ali, all these young guys that they should be pushing, but yet we go back to Sheamus. Nobody cares. I said this on a social media post yesterday. This is like Big Ben with the Steelers. Like, what is it with this guy? Like, what is it? Like, I'm over it. Move on. Like, it's time for the young and the new. He ain't what he used to be. Sheamus was something at one point and could have been like bigger, but his time has come and gone. I mean, he's a good wrestler, but in 2021, that does nothing for me. Like, I'm over it. Ugh. Bad decision there. Good chance for Riddle there for a star-making performance. put on a hell of a match. These guys actually did pretty well together. I'll give them that. But just the decision. Come on. And if it was done just to swerve us, it's stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. You stupid idiots. It's not hard, WWE. I love you guys, but gosh, when you deserve to be criticized, like, you guys deserve it. Like, and for something like this, you deserve it. But yeah, we'll see what happens. Raw after WrestleMania, usually pretty good. We'll see what happens though. If there's no Becky Lynch to signal some type of return, then I'm out till SummerSlam. All right, so you won't get full on wrestling from me until then. Last thing I want to cover before we wrap up here, and this will be on a somber note for me. As I'm recording this, there was a news alert that came on my phone from ESPN. Patriots related, they have released Julian Edelman. After 11 years with this organization, he is no longer with the team. And I know he's been dealing with a lot of injuries, a lot of nagging injuries throughout the years. So this was kind of like, we were already kind of like at the end of his career, even though he's still a young guy. But in the NFL, like, injuries pile up. Like, you know, just like in wrestling, you pile up all these injuries. You're like a shell of your former self, and you're just never the same. So he's no longer with the team, and it's also expected that he's going to retire, which is also bumming news because I would have loved to have seen him have like maybe 1 or 2 seasons more just to do something, and maybe he will. Who knows? It's just that's what's being reported, right? Like, it's not official. It's just that's what the rumblings are, and this is coming from one of the Boston reporters who I really trust. He's a really good reporter for the Patriots, and he's good at covering this team and all the news. So I don't think he would lie, but also it's not like official until we see like a post from Julian Edelman himself saying that he's going to retire. Like, I won't believe it. But I just need to say, like, out of all the Patriots that have come and gone, obviously Tom Brady, of course, will always be at the top of that list. What he did for this franchise will never be forgotten, bar none. 6 championships with that organization doesn't happen without that guy. He's the heart and soul of that team. That's without question. You know, other than the coach, it was always Tom Brady. Like, that's the guy. He's the guy. But one of the other strong locker room leaders to emerge during the Brady run with Belichick, and this came in the latter part of the dynasty, was Julian Edelman. He was that little scrappy, like, just underdog that you could just get behind. Like, he was feisty, man. This guy, I remember when he started with the team, he was just like a punt returner. He was like on special teams. He was like he was a nobody. He played on defense. I remember seeing him playing on defense. And then they transitioned him into this receiver role, into like this Wes Welker slot receiver. And he ended up becoming one of Tom Brady's, you know, most trustworthy weapons and go-to guys. Like, that's the guy Brady would trust the most as far as like, oh shit, we're on a 3rd and 3. Who can we get the ball to move the chains? Julian Edelman. So he was always good for those little like catch and runs, like escaping the tackle and gaining that extra yardage. But he was also like a huge locker room leader, man, giving inspirational speeches, pumping everybody up just as much. You know, that's part of Brady's amazingness as a teammate, was the fact that he could inspire others to be like leaders and pump up the team. And that's what Julian Edelman was. Like, he was just like the little brother, like, that just would piggyback off of what Brady would do, but he would also bring his own flavor to it. He would even pump up Brady at times when he needed it. So he was just like that type of guy. I think back to Super Bowl 51 when they're trailing against the Falcons, right? They're coming back in the second half, and, you know, everyone's kind of looking defeated. Me, myself, as a fan watching the game, I was just like, I couldn't believe what was happening. But you go back and you watch the NFL films, and then all the players being mic'd up, and Julian Edelman's like talking about like, oh man, it's gonna be like a hell of a story, man. It's gonna be a hell of a story this second half. And we all found out at that time, or at least post that game, that Tom Brady's mom had been battling breast cancer, and, you know, Brady was struggling with that emotionally. And one of the things I remember from the NFL films on that was Julian Edelman going up to Tom Brady, and I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. And he's like, "We're gonna win this, man, and we're gonna win it for your mom. We're gonna win this game for your mom." Like, that's, as a teammate, as a friend, as someone like on your side, to have somebody say that to you, like that means like if somebody said that to me, like, you know, hey, we're gonna do this for your mom, like it's not just about us, but it's about your mom too. Like this is a big part of it. Like that will forever like be one of Julian Edelman's greatest moments, just as a person. Like unbelievable. Yes, they ended up winning the Super Bowl, dramatic comeback, but one of the biggest moments was Julian Edelman in that moment telling Tom Brady, we're gonna do this for your mom. Just overall tremendous competitor. So much heart, 3-time Super Bowl champion as part of the Patriots. He won the Super Bowl MVP in the final Super Bowl the Patriots won against the Los Angeles Rams. Deservingly so. It wasn't one of those like, oh, we just got to give it to somebody. Like, no, Julian Edelman it was a tough defensive struggle in that Super Bowl, and Julian Edelman was the only one getting separation and getting, you know, yards after the catch and all that stuff. He didn't score the final touchdown, but he was a huge contributing factor as far as like getting the offense to get something going in that game. So Julian Edelman's gonna, if this is it for him, if he's gonna retire, and he's got a lot of these postseason records that only like him and like Jerry Rice are like at the top of the list. Like that's some pretty amazing company to be on. To be with, you know, some people consider Jerry Rice to be the greatest wide receiver of all time, and for Julian Edelman to have like records up there in the top echelon with him, to me, Julian Edelman is a Hall of Famer. 3-time Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl MVP, has those postseason records with Jerry Rice. I know he was never mentioned along the likes with like Julio Jones and Des Bryant and, you know, guys like that, you know, Antonio Brown. Like, there was nothing. Julian Edelman did get suspended once over something that he paid the price for, but other than that, this guy was always a stand-up guy, like never any trouble, anything like that. To me, he's a Hall of Famer, like for sure. And I'm not just saying that as a Patriots fan. I mean, just look at his body of work and what he was able to do. And, you know, for a guy his size and stature, like he really should have been a nothing. And the fact that he was able to transition into different areas on that team, and even playing quarterback at one point, right? In one of the most pivotal Patriots playoff games in their history was the 2014 divisional round against the Baltimore Ravens, where they needed a play. They kept going down against the Ravens. Like, they went down twice to them in that game. That game took years off of my life. But one of the most memorable plays in the history of that run, that Super Bowl run that they ended up winning against the Seahawks. But against that game, against the Ravens, Julian Edelman does that touchdown pass to freaking Danny Amendola in a perfect touchdown pass. It's gonna be crazy. Like, if this is it for him, like, he has had a hell of a career. Another amazing moment with him, Super Bowl 51, as I just mentioned, that tremendous speech he gave to Brady and that inspirational, like, we're going to do this, was that impossible catch he made that, like, he caught in between, like, two Falcons players' legs as they were all scrambling to the ground. I have a t-shirt that he made off of his website for it. Like, he's going to be remembered, for me as a Patriots fan, but also just like as a great NFL player, competitive spirit, just amazing stuff that he pulled off, and he won championships out of it. Like, this guy is legit. He's a real deal. And it's sad that this is probably the end, you know, with the injuries and stuff like that. So I wish him nothing but the best. And Jules, the squirrel, like, you've brought me so many great joys and memories being a Patriots fan. And I will root for you to get into the Hall of Fame, even if I have to do I'll do a whole episode dedicated to you, man, because you are worthy of getting into Canton if this is the end of your career, because I believe that's the next stop for you, is the Hall of Fame. So, Julian Edelman released from the Patriots today, and it's sad for me, but it's kind of like almost the end of that Patriots run, minus like Belichick and maybe Josh McDaniels, because Gronk's gone, Brady's gone, you know, and now Edelman's gone. Like, those are like core members of that crew, like on these last final Super Bowl runs. So yeah, sad day for Patriots fans, but there's a lot to look forward to as far as like him going into the Hall of Fame. So Patriots fans, if you're listening, those in Boston, like, you guys need a campaign for that, because this guy was just as important as Brady as far as like he was an important member of this organization. So, yeah, gonna wrap it up on that. Julian Edelman, gonna miss you, buddy. You can follow this podcast on Spotify. Search Palace Off the Top Rope. Hit that follow button. I do share this podcast link through my social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter through podbean.com. You can download the app. You can listen on your phone. Or if you're an Apple person, subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Leave me that 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate it. It helps in all the data. Again, I'm trying to grow this podcast more and more. I'm trying to do different things. I got all these ideas in my head of what I want to do. So a lot to look forward to. I'm happy to do this podcast. Kind of glad WrestleMania is over. So it's a fun time for wrestling fans, but also it's like I'm at the point now where it's burnout at this point of the talk of it. Like it's come and gone. Like, yeah, I could use a break from wrestling unless Becky Lynch returns. So Becky, if you don't come back tonight, you won't hear about wrestling from me for a while. So yeah, thank you guys for joining me today, and we'll see you later down the week. I think I got another episode planned. So hopefully y'all stick around during the weekend and watch that drop. But this will be up as soon as possible. So thank you guys. Enjoy the start of your work week. God bless you.